So we've made it to 10 months with the 12.9-inch iPad Pro. No, it is still not bent. Thank you for asking, all you jerks. And today I'll be explaining to you why I think this is peak iOS experience. Sure, iPhones with their amazing cameras and wireless charging, they're cool and all, but all in all, I think the iPad Pro is the best overall way you can possibly experience the beauty that is the iOS operating system that Apple has worked over a decade on perfecting. And there's a lot of things the iPad Pro allows you to do that the iPhone never can, and it's not meant to. This is just experiencing a full touch dominant interface to the maximum, the best you possibly can. And if you were looking for criticisms of the iPad Pro in today's video, you're not going to be hearing much from me. So without further ado, let's begin. Without question, the thing that makes my iPad Pro my go-to product of use when I'm looking to get up from my desk or go on a trip or watch videos over on the couch and be able to take it around with me is that 120 Hz ProMotion display. This is not going to be noticeable for everyone, I'm aware of that. In fact, I've tried really hard to show everyday people who aren't really that tech savvy the 120 Hz display, and a lot of them don't really notice it. But as someone who's kind of a sucker for higher frame rates, I really do appreciate it. And while I doubt it will ever make it onto an iPhone someday, I still love that we luckily do have Apple products today that support it, because it does look simply gorgeous. Just scrolling, navigating through apps, so much more buttery than what you're used to on other 60 Hz displays. And while it's not something everyone notices or appreciates, it's something I definitely do, which is why the iPad Pro definitely is one of the devices I pick up and use as much as I can. And the other great thing the iPad Pro, of course, has over a standard iPhone is those split screen multitasking features, which I'm well aware there's plenty of you that want that brought to the iPhone, but in my opinion, you can try split screen multitasking on a pocketable screen, but in my opinion, there's just not enough screen real estate for it to be comfortable. The keyboard always covers up half of an app, or if you do picture-in-picture, yeah, it kind of works, but it's so tiny that you can't really get much detail out of the video you're watching anyway. And I know I'm alone in this field, but personally, I think it makes the most amount of sense that if you're going to be using picture-in-picture or split screen, the iPad Pro is the single best way to do it, because you can still have plenty of content on the screen even when the keyboard is brought up, so you don't have to worry about certain amounts of content getting crowded, and the picture-in-picture feature is still viewable enough that you can see the detail that's going on in the video that you're watching, but also be managing several different apps at the same time. Whereas on a smartphone screen, in my opinion, it just gets way too crowded. I've tried it on Android phones in the past and I can't find a sweet spot. With the iPad Pro, it's so very comfortable to be running two apps at once. It's so good at doing that, and the virtual keyboard is unlike any other tablet I've ever used. And what I appreciate so much about this iPad Pro is the priority of touch dominance. Yes, of course, Apple sells their $200 keyboard case, which for some of you may be a good buy, but for me personally, I would much rather just use the virtual keyboard that's included, for one, because it's a whole lot cheaper and it works very, very well. It does a great job at popping up when it needs to and disappearing when it doesn't need to be there. And between Surface devices, between Android tablets, between Chromebooks that are missing keyboards, I cannot find another tablet on the market that understands when and when not to bring up the keyboard. Most other tablets out there will constantly assume you have a trackpad or mouse connected to it, so they're not preoccupied with thinking about when the keyboard needs to pop up or how ergonomic it needs to be for activating different special characters like the iPad Pro keyboard does, between the pound sign, the dollar sign, or the percent sign, which you can just get by swiping down, whereas on other products you usually have to tap and hold and wait for a second and then select a different character. Whereas on the iPad Pro, it just feels so smooth, I'm used to it, and frankly, I can't find any other device out there that can mimic the iPad Pro's insanely good virtual keyboard. The other amazing achievement I think Apple made with this year's iPad Pro is the design of it. It's so incredibly thin, record-setting for thinness in an iOS device, almost to a detriment, because we've been hearing so much about certain people who put them in backpacks or in luggage and they get compacted into tight spaces and then they end up warping or bending a little bit. I haven't seen someone's bend so far to the point that the display stops working, and a lot of the time if someone's iPad Pro is bent, they often have no idea that it is, because the only way for you to notice is to close one eye and hold it up to your iPad. But I think that speaks volume to how thin this product really is. And when you're working with a 13-inch display and you want it to be mobile and go in a backpack without adding any extra weight, you kind of need a device to be this incredibly thin. If you think it's just an Apple thing, check out the Galaxy Tab S5e. That thing's even thinner than this, but not as many bend tests. Have you guys noticed that? No one's doing bend tests on the Tab S5e. But you also have to take into consideration most people buying an iPad Pro are buying a case for it or a folio cover. Well, I'm not into the iPad Pro Smart Keyboard because of the insane price and also because I think the virtual keyboard works so well. I am a fan of the folio cases that Apple makes. While they are expensive, you cannot beat this docking mechanism. The fact that you can just drop it on top of the iPad and then boom, no problem, it can hold the iPad Pro just with magnets alone is unparalleled by the competition. You won't find another tablet on the market with accessories that are this easy to dock. You don't have to worry about lining up pins and you don't have to worry about certain electrical things lining up. Even though I know it has a smart connector on the back, the fact that if you're just going with a cover like I am, you don't have to snap it into place. It doesn't have to wrap around the entire iPad. It literally just connects via magnets and that's all it needs because the iPad Pro is so incredibly light. I feel like iPad Pros in the past had a lot of possibility with their extended screen real estate, but I often felt that the accessories were kind of holding it back in a way, particularly the Apple Pencil 1, which had this awkward charging method. There was no real easy way to transport the Apple Pencil with your iPad, and Apple completely listened to people complaining and totally embraced the genius that is the Apple Pencil 2. While quite expensive for a stylus, I agree, and it sucks that it's not included, you do have to kind of admit that it's one of the best stylus out there with the lowest latency we've ever seen on a tablet, and also the easiest process of pairing and charging the stylus we've ever seen before now. You don't have some cap to worry about, you don't have to plug it in. It's literally just drop it on the side and, like we brought up before, magnets hold it in place, and that handles the pairing, that handles the charging, and it's done inductively. My favorite way to charge something. In fact, if there was a way to charge the iPad Pro inductively, I would totally do it, even though I know charging this thing inductively would probably be insanely slow and the iPad Pro would gain very little percentage over time. I'm so into inductive charging and just dropping things on charge mats that I would be okay with it, but I'm glad that even though the iPad Pro can't support wireless charging, it can very easily give off a wireless charge with the magnetically attached Apple Pencil, which I do use, even though I'm not really that big of an artist. If you're wondering, Drew, you edit all your videos on an iMac Pro, why do you need an iPad Pro? It's redundant. Well, for me, I would say it's about 70% media consumption. A lot of it is me hanging out in my Discord and talking to people in there with the virtual keyboard, oftentimes for hours, or watching YouTube videos because I can still maintain my Discord or be texting someone in Messenger and messages, and on the side still have a video playing and I can still read through comments on a video while playing it back at a good high resolution and good frame rate. Never have lag in these types of instances. But the other 30% I use my iPad Pro for is creating video thumbnails. Essentially every single video thumbnail you see on Talos of Tech, on Talos of Talks, on Talos of Gaming is all made using two main productivity apps that I would highly recommend for picture or photo editing on the go. One of which is Affinity Photo, which feels like an exact Photoshop clone. For those of you out there who are like, when do we get Adobe Photoshop for the iPad Pro? Affinity Photo is luckily a one-time purchase, not a subscription model, and you get updates for life with it. It is kind of expensive for an app, but if you compare it to the price of paying monthly for Photoshop, in the long term it is much cheaper, and you get a lot of the features with Affinity Photo that Photoshop is so well known for. For me, the best productivity feature in Affinity Photo that I would recommend is the auto erase background feature, which means that if you have a picture of an object and the background is all white or close to white, you can just easily with a magic eraser erase everything behind that object and then export it as a PNG, which then I drag into another great app I love using called Over. Technically, I could really just get the job done with Affinity Photo, but Over I think is slightly more user-friendly and slightly more intuitive than Affinity Photo is, which is much more like a Photoshop. Over is much more like an iMovie, except it gives you way more customization than iMovie does. I've been using Over to make my video thumbnails literally for 3 to 4 years now, and still it's my go-to app for giving font customization, for giving drop shadow, nudging images, multiple layers for giving lots of depth to the pictures you're editing. And those two apps I use quite frequently every single day for all of the videos I publish across the Tailosum network. So yes, I do get to say I'm an iPad Pro user, not just because I watch YouTube and use Twitter. And I don't know if you guys remember, there's probably a lot of you who don't, but way back in the day when Tailosive Tech just started picking up traction, that's when I edited all my videos on the iPad Pro. So before you go, Drew, why don't you do a iPad Pro 1 month challenge where you only use the iPad, you edit everything on there? Yeah, I did that already. In fact, I did it on the first generation iPad Pro using the Apple Pencil 1, and that was a lot slower CPU than this thing was. Granted, I was using a much cheaper camera that wasn't as high resolution or frame rate, but still, I'm fully aware and fully capable of running my entire YouTube channel on this iPad Pro if I wanted to. It's just as fast as the A12X chip is on this thing. My iMac Pro, you know, beats it a little bit. it. So I'm a guy who's trying to save time as much as possible. I'm gonna edit my videos on the iMac Pro because that is faster. And I also think that there's something with a keyboard and mouse that you really can't compete with when it comes to a touch interface. Though I still openly admit that there is a ton of features, there's a ton of productivity times where a touch interface is better or more intuitive, which is why I do all of my picture and photo editing on the iPad Pro and not the iMac Pro. Using both for their advantages, I think, is key. It's not about choosing one or the other. It's about utilizing both for their advantages. Now, I'm sure because of the mention of keyboard and mouse, some of you are probably thinking about iPadOS, which is running on this iPad Pro currently, and I'm trying in this video not really to talk about that so much because I know that I kind of already did a whole video recapping what I love about iPadOS, but all I'll say about iPadOS coming to the iPad and all the great features they're adding is this. It is the most classic and traditional example of an Apple product with extremely good hardware, extremely great design, and then not even a year later after you buy the product, it gains tons more features that you didn't even know were going to be available because Apple listens to its consumers and because they want to give longevity to their products, which is unmatched by the competition. You notice I say that a lot in this video. The number of software updates you're likely going to be getting on the 2018 iPad Pro is easily within the 5 to 6 year range, and what features they're going to be adding to the iPad Pro in just 2 to 3 years must be mind-boggling if you're looking at how many features we got just this year with iPadOS. Thinking of external drive support, mouse support as an accessibility feature, redesigned home screen, Face ID just getting faster via software update, which is awesome. Dark mode, of course, so many things baked into iPadOS that users are totally gonna love once it officially launches in just a couple more weeks, that make the iPad Pro, which in my opinion was already king of the tablets, even more so king of the tablets. In fact, beating out a lot of laptops in functionality and longevity in plenty of ways. Face ID, I think, is still a big feature, especially given it's the best implemented in the iPad Pro. Better than that of Face ID in the iPhone cameras because it works from so many different angles, works from further away, and works in different orientations compared to Face ID on the iPhone, which allows for such ease of unlocking. The fact that you don't have to rest your thumb on a specific part of the device to unlock it, or rest your pointer finger on a certain place, or worry about your fingers being wet. No, you literally just tap the display and boom, it unlocks. It's so simple and yet still super secure. And I love the implementation of using it for iCloud passwords on the go. It's not just limited to unlocking the device. It also goes into Apple Pay features when you're buying things on the web. And the fact that iPadOS brings those desktop version of websites to the iPad Pro was a huge plus. And also a super underappreciated feature I think of the iPad Pro is the speaker quality. This device is insanely thin, but it can still crank it when it comes to playing back music, and it will fill the room very, very clearly. I mean, there's very little distortion, and I've used tablets in the past that claim to have front-facing stereo speakers, and they rattle, and they get peaked out, and they get distorted, and it sounds awful. The quad speakers on this thing are insanely good. Plus, not that everyone is a photographer or videographer, but the cameras on the iPad Pro are also excellent, knocking it out of the park with portrait mode support on the front and 4K at 60 as long as you want to on the back. The other huge advantage the iPad Pro has over lots of other laptops out there is LTE support. Personally, not really needed for me. Maybe it would be more often if I didn't work from home, but currently, yeah, I stay at home a lot of the day, so it wouldn't make much sense for me to pay for an LTE plan, but hey, it's an option on the iPad Pro, which starts just under $1,000, and you can still get a SIM card with it, which is something you can't even do on any configuration of the MacBook Pro. Also, tons of other Windows laptops don't have that option either, so that flexibility of accessing the internet wherever you are, that's a huge feature for a lot of people, and I agree, they should add LTE support to more laptops, especially the MacBooks. A ton of people would appreciate that, but until then, the iPad Pro is still a great way to experience a mobile computing device between the software optimization and the insanely fast A12X chip, the cameras being top-notch, yet still not having a notch, but still retaining Face ID, the display being such a good screen-to-body ratio at 120 Hz ProMotion, USB-C supporting so many different standards and good transfer speeds, and now supporting external drive support, the design being so incredibly compact and light and easy to throw in a bag. My goodness, what can they do with this thing from here? I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, you know, should I get one? Are they updating it next year? Probably, so maybe I should hold off on buying this iPad Pro right now, but honestly, this is one of the few products that I think is insanely ahead of its time. Like, without question, the iPad Pro was ahead of everybody in so many different categories, between ahead of people in biometrics, display refresh rate, latency with the pencil, software optimization in games and how they take advantage of the A12X super fast CPU, the speaker quality on this thing, the lightness factor, how good the cameras are. There's so many different departments the iPad Pro is way ahead in that honestly, I feel like even though though you're watching this 10 months after I bought and unboxed this thing, you'll probably be able to still buy one today, and it will easily last you another 5 to 6 years. Because honestly, yes, I know they're probably going to be refreshing the iPad Pro in June of 2020, but what can they do, frankly? I mean, make the metal thicker so it's less prone to bending, I guess? Yeah, they can make the CPU faster, but is the A12X honestly ever going to feel slow? I take that back. It probably will feel slow in 4 to 5 years, but for the long haul, I still think even after the A13 and A13X chip come out, the A12X is still going to be very, very comparable and faster than a lot of other laptops out there on the market. What are they gonna add to this thing? Water resistance, or maybe some faster Face ID sensors, or louder speakers, I guess? I mean, all I'm trying to say is the upgrade from the 2018 iPad Pro to the 2020 iPad Pro is likely not going to be extremely physical. So if you think that the next generation is going to look drastically different than this one, probably not. I bet aesthetically it's going to look very, very similar, just like the 2015 iPad Pro versus the 2017 iPad Pro. The 12.9-inch versions, those were very, very similar. It's probably going to be the same situation here. If you haven't ever messed around with an iPad Pro and you're thinking about getting one, I highly recommend you go to a Best Buy or an Apple store and try one out for yourself. See what split screen multitasking and typing on that virtual keyboard is like. See if you can notice that ProMotion display. And honestly, I get this question a lot. If some of you are debating between should I get a MacBook Pro or should I get an iPad Pro, my personal suggestion is this. If you're on the fence about it, as in like you think either might be able to work and you're not sure which one to get, then go with the iPad. It's so much more fun. It's going to age way better than the MacBook Pro is. And if you need a MacBook Pro, then you aren't on the fence about it. If you have some class that requires boot camp or requires some desktop application support that's not available on iOS, then you're not on the fence about it. If you know you need a MacBook, you know, I don't have to tell you otherwise. But if you're debating between it, if you're on the fence about it, it probably just means you should go ahead with the iPad Pro, because this has been one of my most favorite Apple products to use in the past decade. The iPhones are amazing, and I'm excited to see what they're gaining this year, but frankly, the iPad Pro was like a sneak peek at the future, and I wish they would borrow so many more things from the iPad Pro and bring it to the iPhone, between the ProMotion, between a lot of the software features that they locked to the iPad. If they could bring so much more to the iPhone, I think a lot more people would be happy, especially USB-C. But if you couldn't tell, the Apple Sheep absolutely recommends the iPad Pro. I've had an immensely good time with it over the last 10 months, and I'm likely going to continue enjoying it for the next 10 months. I can't wait to see what they add next year, but I imagine it won't be as major as the 2018 refresh was, because this, frankly, is going to be very hard to top. If there's any of you out there still rocking the 2018 iPad Pros, let me know what you think of it by hitting me up over on Twitter or joining our Discord. This is your Apple Sheep here. I'll see you guys in the next one.